Now it said that I can talk. Sorry about that. So thank you, Jane, for the introduction and for inviting me to be a part of your webinar series this year. I'm April Taylor, and I'm a Chickasaw member. We have our allotment land in Cole County, and we raise Native American pecans. As Jane said, I am a tribal liaison at the South Central Climate Adaptation Science Center here in Norman, Oklahoma, and I run our tribal engagement program, which includes workforce development, building capacity, and research. And so the title of my talk today is an introduction. So we're going to introduce a lot of the terms and the very basics behind extreme weather events and harmful environmental trends today. So first thing is the difference between weather and climate. So weather is is short-term, day-to-day type of things and changes, where climate is really your long-term sort of collection of weather over a period of years. And so if you've lived here in Oklahoma for a long time or most of your life, you probably know what the climate is like here in Oklahoma, and you know what to expect. And then weather is what you get from day to day, and that often is a lot more variable. So with that, I just want to clarify that today we'll be talking about climate of a region, not so much the weather from day to day. There are natural cycles of climate that can affect the climate of the Earth. And so many of these things are long-term, generational, or not even in our lifetimes that we've experienced some of these things. So things like, the sun and incoming radiation, or the Earth's orbit around the sun, comets or meteorites and asteroid impacts, and then things like internally, where plate tectonics and the locations of continents, the ocean's temperatures and currents, and as those have changed over the time of the Earth, and then just natural changes in the atmospheric composition, such as from volcanoes, as you can see here. So it is when the trends are changing. So no single weather event is a sign of climate change, but a higher frequency over time of certain events, those trends, is trending toward higher intensity of the events, is really when it becomes a concern. Scientists know 99% of confidence that these trends are changing, and they're occurring. And so it's when you have cycles that are in addition to the natural cycles that are causing these things. So there are lots of reports that document this, and they are great resources. And one is the National Climate Assessment. And so the most recent one is the 4th National Climate Assessment that summarize what the science says. And these reports do say that human has caused, and it is not a question of whether it's happening. That this is very likely, in this case, extremely likely that human influence has been the dominant cause of the observed warming since the mid-20th century. There's no convincing alternative explanation for it. And so, so here's some of the other reports that I would suggest. So the National Climate Assessment, and then there are also other reports that are out there. And so lots of resources that I would suggest if you want to read more on these types of science that is available. And so here's a few more. So there's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC reports that also talk about the science, and they review the science. And there are lots of scientists all around the world that contribute to these reports, and all are saying and have evidence of climate change occurring around the world. So why are these reports important? These documents undergo significant peer review, and they have to respond to all those review comments and the public comments. It's quite a rigorous and transparent process. And some of these documents, I mean, they take years for them to develop them. And so they are developed for policymakers, and they focus on the science. So they don't determine the policy, or they're not policy prescriptive in that sense. They just summarize the science. So the IPCC report has a lot of reasons of why climate change is a concern, because climate change is impacting a lot of different things, and so these, even though this is happening at a global large scale, it's impacting each of your local communities as well. And so so tribes may be located in some areas, such as in Alaska, along the more northern latitudes, and so they are deemed as sort of vulnerable to climate change. In addition to tribes have also been included in many of these reports, and so for the National Climate Assessment, you can go to the tribal chapter, which is called Tribes and Indigenous Peoples. It's chapter 15. And so some of the things that is in that chapter is that they include TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, and they talk about how tribes are leading the way in adaptation planning. And that's been my experience in my position as well. It's really inspiring to see that tribes have really stepped up and see this happening and the impacts in their communities, and that they are leading the way. They talk about climate change impacting cultural heritage and then indigenous health, and even some communities that are considering or planning for relocation or displacement in different ways. And so this is a really good resource as well. And then for our region, we also have a regional chapter that I would suggest. And so BIA did fund for the tribes to attend the listening sessions for this chapter for this region, and there were tribal authors for many of the regional chapters as well. And so for our regional chapter, they talk about water resource constraints and challenges to economic, political, and infrastructure limitations. And they even talk about the differences between smaller versus larger tribe capacities, and the need for funding, right? That they're dependent on federal programs and federal grants. So our good friend Chief Gordon Yellowman is also quoted, and they have a narrative for the Cheyenne Arapaho in this report. And so he talks about the willow branches for shade arbors are increasingly harder to find, especially during drought years and with the continuing droughts that we experience in Oklahoma. And so I wanted to share that with you guys. So right now they are working on the National Climate Assessment number 5, and there will be opportunities too for tribal chapters and tribal input as well. But leading up to the next version of the National Climate Assessment, we are currently working on the first time we've ever done a report called Status of Tribes and Climate Change Report. And it's really to broaden the reach and understanding of a tribal and perspective of the impacts and what tribes are doing. So we did some narratives from our region and submitted for this, and the final version of this report is about to come out in May. And so we're looking for opportunities to outreach and present on either the whole report or certain chapters. And so, for example, the cultural resources and climate change chapter might be of interest. And so I'll definitely share that as it comes available. So another key point that I wanted to clarify is that these reports are the best two resources of expert information, either here in the US or worldwide. And so I would point you to those resources. Next, I want to say some basic things about greenhouse gases. So yes, we do have the greenhouse effect, and this is a natural process that allows for life to be present on Earth and on our planet. And so the aspect that, this sort of creates that blanket of warm air and keeps our Earth's surface warm enough for life to exist here on our planet. Then problem is that when you get too much of those greenhouse gases is really the issue. And so it doesn't have a means to release any of those greenhouse gases. So these greenhouse gases continue to heat and hold on to that heat long term. And this is what's happening at a global scale. And again, scientists are quite certain that this is happening. There's no debate about it. They've known this for quite a while. I mean, even scientists such as Newton or these old guys that you hear about, the wise men, they often spoke about the issues and concerns of greenhouse gases and knew this process and knew that this could happen. So greenhouse gases are necessary for our Earth to be livable, but adding too much to the atmosphere will disrupt the long-term energy balance, increasing the thermal energy in the atmosphere. So we've been recording this and measuring this for some time, and they continue to see these increases. As you can see here, these graphs are showing the graphs for carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And all of these greenhouse gases are significantly increasing and have been increasing for the last few decades. And so it's well measured. We have good data on these greenhouse gases. One of the most famous one is called the Charles Keeling curve, and they have an observatory in Hawaii that they've been measuring carbon dioxide. And as you can see, what's I think is cool is that you have the sort of breathing of the Earth. So you have these ups and downs seasonally of the Earth breathing, but overall, as you can see, there's this significant increase and trend upward in the amount of carbon dioxide. And so it's becoming quite concerning that this continues to increase. So they also have looked at the greenhouse gases, gas emissions by different gases. And so you can see here that the largest contributor is carbon dioxide, and it is primarily from fossil fuel use. But there are other greenhouse gases as well that are contributing to this. So greenhouse gases have been increasing at an abnormally fast rate due to human activity. These greenhouse gases are long-lived, and so they will remain in our atmosphere for decades. There are lots of indicators of a warming world. So you may have heard things like the glaciers melting or sea ice and ice sheets and things like that, but there are lots of other types of things that scientists look at. So things like the timing of spring or species migrating and the changes in the migration patterns. And so lots of different indicators of how that show us that that climate change is happening. Scientists have lots of different ways to observe the climate. And so these are just some of those. So maybe things like ice cores or sediment cores, or looking at coral reefs and coral production. And then, as you probably know, there are lots of satellites and global observing systems these days. But I do want to say that that there are communities that also have traditional knowledges and observations and have observed changes in their communities and their since the origins of their times, and they've adapted and know these things, and they have seen these changes. And so traditional knowledge is also really key piece of information and are relevant for, and also indicate that these changes are happening as well. Scientists also know that temperatures, air temperatures have been changing. So globally in the last 3 decades, we've seen significantly warmer than previous decades. And so this is happening and continues to happen. And so you may have heard things like records being broken, the warmest year on record. Well, this is that data that they're looking at over time, that it's continues to get warmer. And one thing though is that this climate change is happening at a regional scale. So some regions are seeing more warmer than others, and there are reasons for that. As you can see here on some of these graphs, your northern latitudes are seeing much warmer temperatures than other areas. And then here in the US as well, you're seeing areas that are significantly warmer. Alaska has seen quite a bit of increases in temperatures as well. You may have seen or noted that in the southeastern US that there's a tendency toward a cooling or neutral, and that one of the main reasons why is that timber has a cooling effect in the southeast. And so we've seen significant increases in the amount of timberland in the southeastern US in the last few decades. And so that's the reason why in the previous map that you see the southeast not seeing the increases in temperatures. So looking at precipitation, again, those changes are not regional and affects different parts of the world differently. Some areas they're seeing significant more increases in annual precipitation. And then we're also seeing changes in the timing of that precipitation. So in the winter time versus the springtime, and when we get our rain is changing as well. Next, these historical observations demonstrate the rapid climate changes in surface temperatures, sea ice, glaciers, sea level, and other parts of our climate system. These changes are all consistent with a warming planet. The changes are not consistent with long-term natural variations. And so a lot of those long-term reasons for why the Earth's climate changed in the past are not the reasons for why this is happening today. So climate change, so why do we care? Well, you know, we rely on our agriculture and our foods and our water and ecosystems. It affects our communities. It even affects our health, such as pollen changes or heat stress, or vector-borne diseases. It affects a lot of different things that we care about, and it is impacting all sorts of sectors. It's happening and we've caused it. Human activities have caused about 1 degree Celsius of global warming above pre-industrial levels, and global warming is likely to reach 1.5 by 2030 to 2050 by mid-century. Carbon dioxide emissions to reduce now, so we really need to consider how we can reduce the greenhouse emissions. So here at our center, we do climate projections, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do and what we have. So we can look at projected change in number of hot days. So here in our region, we typically get 30 days above 100 degrees. And we're looking at getting significantly more days that are hot. So maybe around 2 months or 30 more days of over 100-degree weather in our region. And so that can be concerning. We all know what a 100-degree day feels like here in Oklahoma. So the changes are also happening on nighttime, so that really affects our crops and our gardens and our plant life here in Oklahoma. And so the number of warm nights and temperatures at night, that it's not getting as cool in the nighttime, is also changing. We're seeing more droughts and more days of consecutive dry days where we're not getting the rain. And so droughts are becoming more intense, and they're projected to continue to get more intense in our region. So more intense droughts and longer days of drought. When we look at projected change in heavy precipitation days, what these maps are showing us is that we're going to get all of our rain all at once. And so when we do get it, we'll get it in less days. And so instead of having it spread out over, a month or a few months, we'll get all the rain all at once. And so we'll have bigger, intense rainfall events. And again, what does climate change impact? So I wanted to talk a little bit about things that the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators might care about. So these things, climate change may impact the range of different milkweed species in the US. And shift in where these plant species will thrive or do. So in some species, we see that range being moving northward or to more limited areas. So where should we restore, and what is best for our region in order to protect in the areas we do have and to focus our efforts? Furthermore, so these things, changes in temperature and precipitation and soil moisture, changes the optimal range of habitat suitability and the competition with other species. And so, or it may impact reproduction and timing of when food is available or things like that. Further impact bees and pollinators, so habitat loss, nutritional deficiencies, lack of diet are all directly tied to climate change. Phenology and the timing of when flowers bloom and not getting pollinated by the pollinators and bees that don't have food. So can we restore and help these things out and provide at different timing of these things? Furthermore, it's impacting our cultural resources that we may care about. So some of these plants may be harder to find. Maybe they are things that we may lose or not have access to here in Oklahoma, and it may mean that we may have to go back to or travel to areas to have access to. And so understanding those changes, and again, the timing, so the timing of harvest seasons or the timing of our ceremonies. So I know, like with Seneca Cayuga, they talk about a strawberry ceremony and when the strawberries are available. And so that timing may change. And so helping these things adapt and sharing with our northern tribes or sharing across the landscapes or in different ways. And so I visited the Kickapoo tribe of Texas early on in this position, and they had already picked up on some of these things, that these things were not doing well in their area in Big Bend National Park, and they were already setting up seed sharing. And so they had a sort of a relationship with the Ysetah del Sur about sharing their plants that are important to them so that they still have them and access to them. I've talked quite a bit with the Kickapoo about cattails, and that in the northern regions where they're from, in the Great Lakes areas, that there's lots of cattails up there. But here in Oklahoma, they're definitely impacted by the droughts here in Oklahoma. So there are things to think about or consider. So how do we manage our lands? What practices can we implement to survive these droughts? Are there practices that are more resilient for the long term, and that we can conserve water or do to help those things? And are there benefits for implementing such? Is it worth our time and efforts to do these things? And so how do we learn from other tribes that are doing some of these practices, and how are they working out? And so another example is I visited the Salish Kootenai tribes, and they're doing restoration efforts for a pine. I think it's a white pine that's up in their mountaintops that's culturally significant for them. And so they've really focused on restoring a species of tree that may not do well under climate change or already isn't doing well. So things we can think about is maybe seed banking and seed sharing practices. Are there other things we can do to ensure our cultural resources are available for the long term? Do we need to consider restoring these species, learning from each other, and what are other tribes doing, and what are they considering? And so with that, that's all I have for today, but I will be happy to answer some questions, and stick around. So Jay and I will stop sharing.
So if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box here. And our first question, how can we access the maps that showed vegetation changing over the next 100 years? I found those fascinating.
So one example of a tool, and I can put it in the chat here, is it's with the U.S. Forest Service, and it's called the Tree Atlas. So I'll have to look up the link. But they have been doing some of these species distribution maps and changes. And so let me look up the link. But yes, or you can email me, and I'd be more than happy to pull those maps.
Okay, and I don't think, let's see. I think this was a question that was from Ray, and Ray, I will send you that later. I'm having trouble figuring out how to share this. I don't know. Can you share your screen, April, with that address on it? If not, as I said, Ray, I can send that out to you and to anybody else who would like it as well.
As my email?
Oh, your email, and then the link to the atlas for the trees.
So I just put that in the chat, the tree atlas, but I'll put my email.
So that was to the organizers and panelists only on the chat?
Do I have a
Sorry, we're having technical difficulties today. We're usually a little more together than this. I do apologize. Okay, he doesn't see the chat. So, oh, here, wait, I think I've got an idea here. Just give me 1 second.
Mine doesn't say that I can send stuff to everybody. It just says organizers or organizers and panelists.
Okay, so here's to the entire audience, and let me see if I can do a cut and paste on that, which it is not letting me. So April, on your chat where it says to, if you toggle the down bar, it should say to the entire audience.
It doesn't have that option for me.
Okay, let me type this in real quick, and then we will do our. You think after a year of COVID we would have this figured out, right? Okay, hang on real quick here. www.fs. Okay, and so as I've typed this out, we have a next question, which is, have you seen any changes of migration patterns of the monarch butterflies?
So that's a great question. Where's Chip when you need Chip? I'm not a monarch butterfly specialist or expert there, but I would assume that, so I believe Chip told me that they have seen changes with droughts and drought years.
Yeah, they're significantly impacted. And additionally, it's the Western population is just being decimated by that. So, okay, tree backslash. This should work, Ray. So, okay, let's see. Did I get that right, April?
Yes.
Okay. So, hopefully that tree did. There we go. All right, and so, and here's another comment from Ray. I know a bit about monarchs, and based on folks I've spoken to in the Southeast, a few more are going to be there, going there to spend the winter rather than Mexico. So, I think it's just disrupting the migratory pattern in some ways that are obvious with drought and heat affecting the eastern population, but other ways that are more subtle and frankly insidious in the Western population. And we're certainly seeing the Western population dropping more dramatically. And again, much of that. We did a webinar about this back in maybe December, and that Chip Taylor led about the impact of climate variation on monarch populations, and that is archived on our website. If you can go to tribalallianceforpollinators.com, and if you go to resources or learning materials, you can find that archived webinar. It was really good. So if you have any trouble locating it, please feel free to email me at jane@nativebutterflies.org, and I can send that to you as well. All right. And do we have any more questions from anybody? I think I think that's good. So at the beginning, I was muted, having technical difficulties today, but I did have a few quick announcements. We've set the dates for the TAP 2021 conference, and it's going to be a big multi-day event, outdoors, socially distanced and all whatnot, on September 21st to the September 24th, 2021. It will be held at the Uchee Butterfly Farm, which is just outside of Bixby, Oklahoma, South Tulsa County. We have a lot of travel scholarship funding available through the generosity of BIA. And so anybody that's interested in coming to that, please let us know. We're hoping to get participation from tribes from all over Oklahoma, and hopefully as many tribes from across the country as we possibly can. our new website, tribeallianceforpollinators.com. We'll have details about the conference posted soon, and we'll also be sending out an email announcement. But please put that on your calendar. We are also planning tentatively an in-person TAP workshop in May. And again, that's going to be outdoors. It'll be socially distanced, masked, and all that kind of stuff. But you will be doing some information about planting and some helpful information about that restoration work. And then you'll also be able to pick up native plants for your own habitat restoration projects to take back with you. So an announcement will be sent early next week with more details on that and a registration link. So we're hopeful that we can get back to not normal life or anything, but we are hopeful that we can get back to in-person programming and workshops soon. And the one good thing is that during the long year of shutdown is we spent a lot of time at the farm, just our staff, getting things in better shape. So next time, if you have been there before, next time you see it, it's going to look a lot different. So we're looking forward to hopefully hosting you soon. So with that, I think that concludes our presentation for today. Thank you so much, April. We really, really appreciate you and all you do for tribes and keeping us safe and building resilience and sharing this technical information with the rest of us who aren't as familiar with these issues, because they're something that we're all going to have to grapple with. So it's a topic that at TAP we're going to continue to work on, is how to help tribes and tribal citizens build resilience. And April Taylor is certainly a key player in that in the state of Oklahoma with sharing that information. So with that, thank you again for joining us, and have a good rest of your day. Thanks. Bye-bye.